I am Commander Samantha Carter, 34 years old, and I earned that medal. 14 years in the Navy, specialized in cybersecurity, saved countless lives during that Persian Gulf operation. But when I brought it home, my father, the retired colonel, barely looked at it. His eyes were always fixed on my brother Ryan, the Army golden boy. That night, Dad took my medal and placed it among Ryan's accolades as if it belonged there instead. I stood frozen, words caught in my throat. The ultimate betrayal from the man whose approval I had chased my entire life. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button and prepare yourself for a journey about family, validation, and finding your own worth in a world that tries to diminish it. Growing up as Colonel William Carter's daughter meant two things. We never stayed in one place long enough to call it home, and military excellence wasn't requested, it was expected. Our family moved 13 times before I turned 18, bouncing between military bases across the country and overseas. Mom would make each new house feel familiar with the same family photos arranged just so, but Dad's rigid standards were our true constant. My earliest memories involve watching Dad inspect Ryan's posture at the dinner table, teaching him to shine his shoes until they reflected like mirrors, and drilling him on military history. I would sit across from them, absorbing everything, hoping to catch Dad's attention by memorizing battle strategies and weapons specifications. But Colonel William Carter had very specific ideas about how his children should serve the country. Military men need military wives who understand sacrifice. He would say while looking directly at me, "Your responsibility will be supporting the brave men who serve, just like your mother." Mom would smile tightly at these moments. Patricia Carter had given up her promising career as a nurse to follow her husband around the world, raising two children largely on her own during his deployments. I saw the brief flashes of regret in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Ryan was 5 years older and followed Dad's blueprint perfectly. Star quarterback in high school, West Point with honors, then straight into Army Special Forces. Each achievement earned proud claps on the back from Dad and new frame certificates for the Wall of Honor in our living room. When I announced my intention to apply to the Naval Academy during my junior year of high school, Dad laughed. "The Navy? Women don't belong on ships, Sam. Besides, Carter men have been Army for 3 generations. I'm not a Carter man," I responded quietly. That dinner ended with Dad's napkin thrown onto his plate and his chair scraping harshly against the floor as he left the table. Mom helped me with my application in secret. When the acceptance letter came, Dad barely acknowledged it. "At least it's not the Air Force," he muttered. Annapolis was where I discovered my calling. While Ryan was following Dad's footsteps into combat roles, I excelled in the emerging field of cybersecurity. The digital battlefield fascinated me, a place where intelligence and strategic thinking mattered more than physical strength, where I could protect American lives without firing a single bullet. I graduated 4th in my class, but Dad missed the ceremony due to a scheduling conflict. Later, I learned he had been golfing with Ryan, who was home on leave. My early years as an officer were challenging. Despite outperforming many of my male counterparts, I was often overlooked for choice assignments. Lieutenant Diana Mackenzie, my first commanding officer, took me aside after I was passed over for a tactical team lead position. "You have to be twice as good to get half the credit, Carter," she said. "It's not fair. But it's reality. So be 3 times as good." I took her advice to heart. I worked longer hours, volunteered for difficult assignments, and pursued additional certifications and training. When most of my colleagues were unwinding at the Officers Club, I was studying advanced encryption methods and attending cybersecurity conferences on my own dime. My breakthrough came 5 years into my service during a joint operation with the NSA. Our team was tasked with identifying potential digital vulnerabilities in a new weapons system. While others focused on obvious entry points, I discovered a subtle backdoor that could have allowed enemy forces to completely disable the system remotely. Admiral Thomas Lawrence personally commended me for my thoroughness. "You just saved countless lives, Lieutenant Carter," he said. "Most of them don't even know it yet, but you did." That recognition led to faster promotions and more specialized assignments. I developed a reputation for finding what others missed, for thinking like our adversaries to anticipate their next moves. By 30, I had reached the rank of lieutenant commander and was leading my own division within naval intelligence. Through it all, my father remained unimpressed. During holiday gatherings, he would interrogate Ryan about his missions, at least the declassified parts, while asking me perfunctory questions about computer stuff. My mother would squeeze my hand under the table, her silent support the only acknowledgement of my achievements. During one particularly difficult Christmas dinner, Dad spent 20 minutes describing Ryan's recent promotion ceremony to extended family while completely omitting any mention of my own promotion that had occurred just a month earlier. Later, when I helped Mom with the dishes, she whispered, "He doesn't understand what you do, Samantha. It doesn't fit his idea of military service. But I'm proud of you." Her words helped, but they couldn't fill the hollow space where my father's approval should have been. Despite my growing success, part of me was still that little girl desperately trying to catch Colonel Carter's attention. By the time I reached my early 30s, I had established myself as one of the Navy's leading experts in cybersecurity countermeasures. I had published papers, developed new protocols, and trained hundreds of personnel. My reputation within military intelligence circles was solid, but none of that prepared me for what happened in the Persian Gulf, the mission that would change everything. The call came at 0200 on a Tuesday. I had been asleep for barely 3 hours after a 36-hour shift analyzing potential threats to our Pacific Fleet communications systems. "Commander Carter, we need you in the SCF immediately." Lieutenant Grace Bradley's voice was tight with urgency. 30 minutes later, I stood before a wall of screens displaying what appeared to be routine network traffic analyses from our naval bases in the Persian Gulf. Admiral James Wilson, commander of the 6th Fleet, addressed the hastily assembled team via secure video link. "We have reason to believe our systems in the Gulf have been compromised," he said without preamble. "Initial indicators suggest a sophisticated intrusion, possibly state-sponsored. We need to identify the extent of the breach and neutralize it without alerting the perpetrators." My team consisted of 7 specialists. Lieutenant Bradley, my second-in-command with expertise in network architecture, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rivera, a former hacker recruited by the Navy for his unorthodox approach to security, Ensign Allison Mitchell, fresh from advanced training, but with a brilliant analytical mind. Chief Warrant Officer Keith Powell, our hardware specialist, Lieutenant Junior Grade Tina Rodriguez, communications expert, and Senior Chief Petty Officer Leonard Thompson, a 20-year veteran with extensive field experience in signals intelligence. "Time is critical," Admiral Wilson continued. "We have intelligence suggesting a potential naval operation against our carrier group in 72 hours. If our systems are compromised, our people are sitting ducks." The weight of 12,000 sailors' lives settled onto my shoulders as I was given operational command of the cyber response. "We'll need complete access to all systems, sir," I said, "and permission to implement countermeasures without the standard approval chain. In this time frame, bureaucracy could cost lives." The Admiral's face revealed his discomfort, but he nodded. "Granted, Commander. This is your show." For the next 18 hours, we worked without breaks, diving deep into the network's architecture, looking for anomalies. Rivera spotted it first, a nearly imperceptible latency in command transmission that others might attribute to normal network congestion. "It's like watching someone's shadow when they think they're invisible," he explained, pointing to the data patterns. "There's something there that shouldn't be." By hour 24, we had identified the intrusion points, subtle modifications to the firmware of critical communication systems, The malicious code was designed to activate precisely when our ships would be most vulnerable, jamming communications and disabling defensive systems. "They're good," Mitchell said, admiration mixing with concern in her voice. "This would have been catastrophic." "But not as good as us," I replied, already formulating our response. The standard protocol would have been to simply remove the malicious code and patch the vulnerabilities. But that would alert our adversaries that we'd discovered their plan, potentially causing them to accelerate their timeline or seek alternative attack vectors. Instead, I proposed something riskier, a counter-intrusion that would feed false data to the attackers while we maintained control of our actual systems. We let them think their plan is working, I explained to the team. Meanwhile, we evacuate the targeted coordinates and position our assets to intercept when they make their move. Powell raised concerns about the complexity of maintaining such a deception. "One slip and they'll know we're onto them." "Then we don't slip," I said simply. The next 48 hours were the most intense of my career. We worked in shifts, constantly monitoring the adversary's interactions with our systems, feeding them carefully crafted misinformation while simultaneously hardening our actual defenses and coordinating with fleet commanders for the real-world response. The critical moment came at hour 67. Our monitoring systems detected increased activity from the hostile actors. They were initiating their attack sequence. Our carrier group, appearing vulnerable according to the false data we were feeding, was actually positioned optimally for defense, with additional support vessels that the enemy didn't know about. "They're taking the bait," Bradley confirmed, her eyes fixed on her monitor. The next 5 hours were a delicate dance of digital deception. We simulated communication disruptions and system failures while maintaining perfect situational awareness. When the actual attack came, a coordinated effort involving both cyber measures and physical assets, our forces were prepared. What could have been a devastating blow to our naval presence in the region instead resulted in the neutralization of the threat with 0 casualties on our side. The hostile vessels, realizing they had lost the element of surprise against a fully prepared defense, retreated rather than engaging in a battle they couldn't win. Admiral Wilson's face on the video screen showed rare emotion when I delivered our final report. "Commander Carter, I don't think I'm overstating this when I say you and your team just prevented what could have been the most significant naval disaster since Pearl Harbor." The official debriefing took another 12 hours. By the time I finally returned to my quarters, I had been awake for nearly 3 days straight. As I collapsed onto my bed, still in my uniform, I received one final message from Admiral Wilson's office. "Commander Carter is to report to Naval Support Facility Arlington upon return to CONUS for recognition of exceptional service." I was too exhausted to process what that meant. All I knew was that we had succeeded, our sailors were safe, and for once, I had led something that even my father might consider worthy of respect. 2 weeks after the Persian Gulf operation, I stood in my dress whites before a gathering of naval officers and officials at Naval Support Facility Arlington. The room was smaller than I had expected for such an occasion, about 50 chairs arranged in neat rows, a podium at the front, and the American flag standing proudly beside the Navy flag. Admiral Wilson had flown in specifically for the ceremony. He stood tall at the podium, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons representing decades of distinguished service. "The nature of modern warfare has changed," he began. "Today's heroes often work in secured rooms with keyboards rather than on battlefields with rifles. Their victories aren't marked by territory gained, but by threats neutralized before they materialize. Commander Samantha Carter exemplifies this new breed of warrior." As he described the Persian Gulf operation in broad, security-cleared terms, I found myself scanning the audience. My team sat in the front row: Bradley, Rivera, Mitchell, Powell, Rodriguez, and Thompson, each looking uncomfortable in their formal uniforms but beaming with pride. They deserved this recognition as much as I did. for exceptional service to the United States Navy and to her country, for leadership that directly saved thousands of lives, and for tactical innovation in the cyber domain. It is my honor to present Commander Samantha Carter with the Legion of Merit. The Legion of Merit. I had never expected such a high honor. As Admiral Wilson pinned the medal to my uniform, a gold-rimmed red, white, and blue cross hanging from a ribbon, I felt a swell of emotion that threatened my military composure. "Thank you, sir." I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "No, Commander," he replied quietly. "Thank you." After the ceremony, there was a small reception. My colleagues surrounded me, offering congratulations and sharing inside jokes about our 72 hours of controlled chaos. Captain Daniel Lawrence, my direct superior, shook my hand firmly. "Well deserved, Carter. This will look good in your promotion packet. Commander to captain has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Everything had happened so quickly. I hadn't considered how this recognition might affect my career trajectory. When I finally had a moment alone, I stepped outside and called my parents' home in Virginia. Mom answered on the third ring. "Samantha, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good, Mom. Really good, actually. I just received the Legion of Merit." The pause on the line told me she wasn't familiar with the decoration. "It's a pretty significant honor," I explained. "Only awarded for exceptionally meritorious conduct." "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Your father just walked in." "William, Samantha's on the phone. She's received a special medal." "What was it called again, dear?" I heard the phone changing hands, my father's gruff voice replacing my mother's warmth. "What's this about a medal, Sam?" "The Legion of Merit, Dad. For the operation I led in the Persian Gulf." Another pause, this one heavier. "Legion of Merit, huh?" "For computer work." I closed my eyes, willing myself not to react to the dismissive tone. "It was a little more involved than that, Dad. Admiral Wilson said we prevented what could have been the worst naval disaster since Pearl Harbor." Well, congratulations. Ryan just got back from his deployment, too. He's being considered for the Silver Star for pulling 3 men from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. Of course, Ryan's achievements always took precedence. "That's great, Dad. I'm happy for him. When are you coming home?" "Your mother wants to do a family dinner. Ryan will be here for 2 weeks before his next assignment." I hadn't planned on going home immediately, but suddenly I needed to see my father's face when I showed him the medal. Maybe this would finally be enough. "I can fly in this weekend," I said. "I have some leave accumulated." Good. Good. Your mother will be pleased." "We'll see you then." After hanging up, I stood staring at the phone for several minutes. The glow of the ceremony had dimmed, replaced by the familiar anxiety that accompanied every interaction with my father. I had just received one of the highest honors of my career, yet I felt like a child again, desperately seeking approval. 3 days later, I boarded a flight to Virginia, my uniform carefully packed with the Legion of Merit securely in its presentation case. As the plane took off, I rehearsed what I would say to my father, imagining his face when he finally understood the significance of what I had accomplished. The fantasy sustained me through the flight, the car rental process, and the drive to my parents' suburban home in Alexandria. It was only when I pulled into the driveway, seeing my father's meticulously maintained garden and my brother's truck already parked there, that reality began to seep in. This was the moment of truth. After 34 years of trying to earn my father's respect, I finally had tangible proof of my value to the military he revered. Surely now he would see me. Mom opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of her familiar perfume and the pot roast cooking in the kitchen. "My girl is home," she said, squeezing me tight. "And with a fancy medal, too." I hugged her back, the knot in my stomach loosening slightly. Whatever happened with Dad, I always had Mom's unwavering support. "Where's Dad?" I asked as she led me inside. In the den with Ryan. They're looking at maps from his deployment. You know how they get. I didn't know. The exclusive club of Carter men and their war stories. A room I had never been invited to enter fully despite my own service. The house looked exactly as it had during my last visit 6 months ago, immaculate furniture arranged at perfect angles, family photos chronicling our lives, and the infamous Wall of Honor dominating the living room. My eyes were drawn immediately to it, dozens of framed certificates, medals, and photographs documenting 3 generations of Carter military service. My single-framed Naval Academy diploma looked out of place among the Army achievements. I placed my duffel bag at the foot of the stairs and straightened my civilian clothes, dark jeans and a blue blouse that Mom had once said brought out my eyes. The presentation case containing my medal felt heavier than its actual weight in my hand. Look who's here, Mom announced as we entered the den. Dad and Ryan looked up from the large map spread across the desk. Dad, at 65, still maintained the rigid posture and commanding presence of his Army days. His hair had gone completely silver, but his blue eyes, the same color as mine, remained sharp and evaluating. Ryan, at 39, was essentially a younger version of our father, though the years of deployments had added lines around his eyes that aged him. Sam. Ryan broke into a genuine smile, crossing the room to give me a bear hug. Despite our father's favoritism, Ryan and I had managed to maintain a decent relationship. He wasn't responsible for Dad's attitudes. Good to see you, kiddo, he said, though I was hardly a kid at 34. Dad remained seated, offering a nod. Samantha, good drive in. No complaints, I answered, fighting the immediate shrinking feeling his presence always evoked. Sam got some big medal, Mom interjected, pride evident in her voice. What was it called again, honey? The Legion of Merit, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Ryan whistled. That's impressive, Sam. What for? Before I could answer, Mom was ushering us toward the dining room. Plenty of time to talk about medals over dinner. The roast will dry out if we wait any longer. Dinner began with Ryan dominating the conversation, recounting sanitized versions of his recent deployment in the Middle East. Dad leaned forward, absorbing every word, asking detailed questions about terrain, tactical decisions, and the men under Ryan's command. The visibility was near zero in that sandstorm, Ryan explained, gesturing with his fork. Anderson was hit and down, Peterson was pinned behind what was left of the Humvee, and Williams had a broken leg. I couldn't just leave them there. So you went back in? Dad nodded approvingly. That's what leaders do. The extraction team said they'd never seen anyone drag 3 grown men through 100 yards of open terrain under fire, Ryan finished. I just did what needed doing. That's my boy, Dad said, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. Carter men run toward danger, not away from it. The familiar phrase twisted something inside me. How many times had I heard that growing up? Carter men. Never Carter children. Never Carter soldiers. Always Carter men. Mom. Sensing the tension, or perhaps just wanting to give me some space in the conversation, turned to me. Tell us about your medal, Samantha. It sounds very important. All eyes shifted to me, and suddenly my mouth felt dry. I had rehearsed this moment repeatedly, but now the words stuck in my throat. It's for the cybersecurity operation I led in the Persian Gulf last month, I began. We uncovered a sophisticated intrusion in our naval communications systems that would have compromised an entire carrier group. Dad's expression remained neutral as I explained the operation in terms they could understand without violating security protocols, the 72 sleepless hours, the innovative countermeasures, the lives saved. Admiral Wilson said it prevented what could have been the worst naval disaster since Pearl Harbor, I concluded, echoing his words because they carried more weight than my own. That's amazing, Sam, Ryan said, and I could tell he meant it. Mom beamed. We're so proud of you, aren't we, William? Dad took a sip of his water before responding. Sounds like you did your job well. That's what we expect from officers. The minimization stung, but I pressed on. This was my moment. I brought the medal to show you, I said, retrieving the presentation case from my bag beside my chair. I opened it, revealing the gold-rimmed cross nestled against blue velvet. Mom gasped appreciatively. It's beautiful, Samantha. I handed the case to my father, watching his face carefully as he examined the medal. His expression revealed nothing as he turned it over in his hands. The Legion of Merit. He read from the certificate. For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements. He closed the case. Good work, Sam. Just good work. Not exceptional. Not outstanding. Just good. I felt the familiar disappointment settling in my chest. Dad, Ryan interjected, the Legion of Merit is a pretty big deal. It's higher than a Bronze Star. Dad nodded absently, still holding the closed case. Then, in a moment that would replay in my mind for months afterward, he stood and walked to the living room. We all followed, confused by the sudden movement. He stopped before the Wall of Honor, surveying the family legacy displayed there. Then, without a word, he placed my medal case on a shelf, not among his own accomplishments or in a new space for my achievements, but next to Ryan's display of honors. You've both served your country well, he said. The Carter family tradition continues. I stared at my medal, now positioned as if it were part of Ryan's collection rather than my own achievement. The message was unmistakable. My accomplishment only had value as an extension of the Carter legacy, not as my personal achievement. And even then, it belonged alongside my brother's honors. As if I were incapable of having my own section on the wall. Actually, Dad, I started, my voice tight, that's my. Who wants coffee? Mom interrupted, her voice unnaturally bright. I made your favorite apple pie, Samantha. Ryan caught my eye, a flash of discomfort crossing his face. He knew what had happened was wrong. But years of conditioning prevented him from challenging our father. Sounds great, Mom, he said, breaking the tension. I've been dreaming about your pie for months. I stood frozen, staring at my medal case nestled among Ryan's achievements. Words formed and dissolved in my mind, none of them appropriate for a family dinner. Finally, I simply nodded and followed them back to the dining room. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled at the right moments, answered questions mechanically, and declined a second slice of pie despite it truly being my favorite. When I could politely escape, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. The room remained unchanged from my high school days, Naval Academy pennant on the wall, bookshelves lined with technical manuals and science fiction novels, and the small desk where I had studied late into the night to maintain perfect grades. It had once been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a museum to a person I no longer was. I sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears I had been holding back all evening. They came silently, years of disappointment flowing down my cheeks as I stared at the ceiling, wondering if anything would ever be enough for Colonel William Carter. Sleep evaded me that night. I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had placed on my ceiling at 16, a small act of rebellion against my father's insistence that my room maintain military precision. The constellations I had so carefully mapped were now just faded dots, much like my hopes of earning my father's respect. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep altogether. Sitting at my old desk, I opened my laptop and began reviewing reports from my team back at base, anything to occupy my mind with work that valued my contributions. Lieutenant Bradley had sent an update on the implementation of our new security protocols across the fleet. The countermeasures we had developed were being standardized throughout naval operations, potentially saving countless lives in future scenarios. My team was making a difference, even if my father couldn't see it. At 6, I heard movement in the kitchen, Mom starting her day as she always had, making coffee and planning meals. I changed into running clothes and headed downstairs, hoping to escape the house before Dad woke up. Mom looked up from the coffee maker, her smile fading when she saw my face. I knew I looked terrible, eyes puffy from crying and lack of sleep. You didn't sleep, she said. It wasn't a question. I'm fine, Mom. Just going for a run. She poured coffee into a travel mug and handed it to me. Drink this first. And Samantha, she hesitated. Your father doesn't mean to be the way he is. He just doesn't understand your world. He doesn't try to understand it, I replied, the words sharper than I intended. Mom sighed. No, he doesn't. But that medal, it really is a tremendous achievement. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom. I accepted the coffee and her hug, wishing her approval could fill the hole where my father should have been. I ran 5 miles that morning, pushing myself harder than necessary, as if I could somehow outrun the disappointment that had followed me home. When I returned, Ryan was in the kitchen with Mom, helping with breakfast preparations. Morning, Sam, he said cautiously. You okay? I'm fine, I lied, pouring another cup of coffee. Listen, he lowered his voice. What Dad did with your medal last night, that wasn't right. I can talk to him. The offer was sincere, but it only highlighted the absurdity of the situation. My older brother still needed to intercede for me with our father, as if I were a child instead of a decorated naval officer. Don't bother, I said. I'm leaving after breakfast anyway. Got called back to base. Another lie, but I couldn't bear another day in this house. Breakfast was mercifully brief. Dad read his newspaper, commenting occasionally on world events with the authority of someone who believed his military experience gave him unique insight into all international relations. I picked at my eggs, responding with noncommittal sounds when directly addressed. You're awfully quiet, Sam, Dad finally said, folding his paper. Just thinking about work, I replied. Actually, I need to head back today. Something came up. Already? You just got here. Mom looked disappointed. Duty calls, I said, the irony of using his favorite phrase not lost on me. You know how it is. Dad nodded approvingly. Responsibility first. That's the military way. It took everything in me not to laugh bitterly at his words. When had he ever approved of my sense of military duty before? I packed quickly, hugged my mother goodbye, and endured a stiff handshake from my father. Ryan walked me to my rental car. That medal really is impressive, Sam, he said as I threw my bag in the trunk. What you did, saving all those sailors without firing a shot, that takes a different kind of courage than what Dad understands. Thanks, Ryan. I meant it. Good luck with your silver star. Keep in touch, okay? And don't let Dad get to you. He's from a different era. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. As I drove away, I watched my childhood home grow smaller in the rearview mirror, the weight on my chest only slightly lighter than when I had arrived. I drove straight to Andrews Air Force Base, where I caught a military transport back to my duty station. Throughout the flight, I questioned my career choices, my need for parental approval at 34, and whether I would ever feel truly valued for my contributions. Upon returning to base, I threw myself into work with renewed intensity. If I couldn't earn my father's respect, I would at least continue to excel at my job. The days blurred together. Endless meetings, training sessions, security briefings, and system evaluations. A week after returning, Lieutenant Bradley caught me leaving the office well past midnight. Commander, a word, she asked, falling into step beside me. What is it, Lieutenant? Permission to speak freely, ma'am? I sighed. Granted. You're working yourself into the ground, and it's affecting the team. Since you returned from leave, you've been different. More driven, but also more distant. Her observation caught me off guard. I prided myself on maintaining professionalism regardless of personal circumstances. I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant, but I'm fine. With all due respect, ma'am, you're not. And we need you at your best. I stopped walking and faced her directly. Lieutenant Grace Bradley had been with me for 3 years, a brilliant officer with impeccable judgment. If she was raising concerns, they were valid. It's personal, Grace. Family stuff. She nodded. I figured as much. After everything you accomplished here, that medal, the protocols now being implemented fleet-wide, if you came back looking like you've been defeated. It had to be something outside of work. Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. My father was less than impressed with the Legion of Merit, I admitted. He basically gave it to my brother. Bradley's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. He what? Put it on the shelf with my brother's medals. As if it weren't mine to begin with. That's... She searched for an appropriate word. Completely unacceptable, ma'am. The simple validation in her statement broke something loose inside me. For the first time since that dinner, I felt seen. Yeah, I agreed softly. It is. Commander, I don't mean to overstep, but what you did, what we did together, saved thousands of lives. That medal represents real achievement, regardless of who understands its value. Before I could respond, my secure phone buzzed. At this hour, it couldn't be routine. Commander Carter, I answered. Commander. This is Captain Lawrence's office. You're needed in Washington immediately. A transport has been arranged for 0600 tomorrow. May I ask what this is regarding, sir? The Pentagon, Commander. That's all I can say over this line. You'll be briefed upon arrival. The call ended, leaving me staring at Bradley in confusion. The Pentagon, she asked, having overheard the conversation. Apparently. No details. Maybe they're finally implementing those advanced protocols you proposed last year, she suggested. Maybe, I agreed. Though something in the captain's tone suggested this was more significant than a technical consultation. The next morning, I boarded a military transport to Washington, my mind cycling through possible scenarios. Had there been another breach? Was I being called to testify before a congressional committee? Or was this related to my upcoming promotion review? None of my speculations prepared me for what awaited at the Pentagon. The Pentagon never fails to impress, no matter how many times you've walked its corridors. The sheer scale of the building, the sense of purpose that permeates every interaction, the weight of national security decisions made within its walls, it creates an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in government. I was escorted from the visitor's entrance by a young Navy lieutenant who maintained a respectful silence about the purpose of my summons. He led me through security checkpoints and down corridors until we reached a set of double doors guarded by 2 Marines in dress blues. Commander Carter reporting as ordered, I told them. Still completely in the dark about what awaited me. One of the Marines opened the door, and the lieutenant gestured for me to enter. They're expecting you, ma'am. I stepped through the doorway and froze. Instead of the small conference room I had anticipated, I found myself at the threshold of a large auditorium filled with high-ranking military officers, civilian officials, and what appeared to be press representatives. At least 300 people all turned to look as I entered. Admiral Wilson stood at the podium on the stage, flanked by the Secretary of the Navy and, most surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense herself. Behind them, a large screen displayed what I recognized as satellite imagery from our Persian Gulf operation, alongside photographs of my team during our 72-hour cyber battle. Commander Carter has arrived, Admiral Wilson announced. Please, Commander, join us on stage. In a daze, I made my way down the center aisle, acutely aware of every eye following my progress. As I approached the stage, I noticed the front row was occupied by familiar faces, my entire team, all in their dress uniforms, grinning at my obvious confusion. Lieutenant Bradley gave me a subtle thumbs up as I passed. This had clearly been planned for some time, and my team had kept it completely secret. I climbed the steps to the stage and came to attention before Admiral Wilson, offering a crisp salute that he returned with equal precision. Commander Carter, he said, his voice now amplified by the microphone. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. My pleasure, sir, I responded automatically, though pleasure was far from what I was feeling. Confusion, anxiety, and a growing suspicion that I had severely underestimated the significance of our operation dominated my thoughts. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward, a woman whose distinguished career I had followed since my academy days. Sharon Marshall had broken numerous glass ceilings throughout her military and political career, and her presence at this event, whatever it was, suggested an importance far beyond what I had imagined. Ladies and gentlemen, she began. The nature of warfare has fundamentally changed in the 21st century. While we continue to honor the courage of those who face physical danger on traditional battlefields, we must also recognize that some of the most consequential battles are now fought in the digital domain, where the warriors never fire a shot yet protect countless lives. She gestured toward the screen behind her, where the satellite imagery was now replaced by complex network diagrams familiar from our operation. 1 month ago, a hostile foreign power attempted what would have been the most devastating attack on U.S. naval forces since Pearl Harbor. Their plan was sophisticated, years in development, and very nearly successful. A murmur ran through the audience as the secretary continued. What they didn't account for was Commander Samantha Carter and her team of cyber warfare specialists, who not only discovered the intrusion, but developed an unprecedented countermeasure strategy that has now become the gold standard for our defensive protocols throughout all branches of service. The screen changed again, showing the broader strategic implications of what we had accomplished: force deployments, diplomatic tensions, and intelligence assessments that had been entirely withheld from us during the operation itself. What Commander Carter and her team could not have known at the time was that this was not an isolated attack. It was the first move in what intelligence indicates was a coordinated plan to destabilize U.S. military presence throughout 3 critical regions. By neutralizing this initial cyber attack so effectively, and more importantly, without alerting the perpetrators that we had detected their broader strategy, Commander Carter's team provided our intelligence community the time needed to uncover and disrupt the entire operation. I felt lightheaded as the full implications became clear. Our 72-hour battle had consequences far beyond what we had been told. Admiral Wilson stepped forward again. Commander Carter was previously awarded the Legion of Merit for her role in this operation. Today, with the declassification of certain aspects of this event, we can more fully recognize the significance of her achievement. The Secretary of Defense returned to the microphone. Commander Carter, step forward, please. I moved to stand before her, maintaining my military bearing despite the surreal nature of the moment. Commander Samantha Carter, her voice rang through the auditorium, for service above and beyond the call of duty. For strategic innovation that has fundamentally advanced our national security capabilities, and for leadership that exemplifies the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. It is my honor to present you with the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. The Distinguished Service Medal, the second highest non-combat decoration awarded to members of the United States Navy. I had never even dreamed of receiving such an honor. As the secretary pinned the medal to my uniform, a gold-filled blue enameled star suspended from a blue and yellow ribbon, I caught sight of my team in the front row. Bradley was discreetly wiping a tear, while Rivera was grinning so widely I feared his face might split. They had known this was coming while I had been wallowing in my father's disapproval. Commander Carter, the secretary said, this time speaking more personally, we need you at the podium. I stepped to the microphone, still processing what had just occurred. The sea of faces before me, admirals, generals, civilian leaders, press representatives, all waited for my response. In that moment, my father's dismissal of my achievements seemed impossibly small and distant. Here were the leaders of the most powerful military in the world, gathered specifically to recognize what I had accomplished. The validation I had sought from one retired colonel seemed suddenly insignificant compared to this room full of my actual peers and superiors who understood precisely what my team had achieved. "Thank you, Madam Secretary," I began, finding my voice. "This honor is overwhelming, and while I stand here receiving it, I must emphasize that the success of our operation was the result of an extraordinary team effort." I went on to acknowledge each member of my team by name, describing their crucial contributions. I spoke about the changing nature of warfare and the importance of adapting our military thinking to new types of threats. I thanked my early mentors and the leaders who had given us the autonomy needed to implement our unconventional strategy. Throughout my improvised speech, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the burden of seeking approval from someone who would never fully understand or value my chosen path. For the first time in my career, perhaps in my life, I felt completely secure in my own accomplishments, validated not by family legacy but by the meaningful impact of my work. As I concluded my remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation. The sound washed over me, not just applause, but affirmation that I had found my place, not as Colonel Carter's daughter, trying to fit into his narrow definition of military service, but as Commander Carter, cyber warfare specialist, protector of sailors who would never know how close they had come to disaster. "Commander Carter," the Secretary of Defense said as the applause finally subsided, "your strategic innovation is already being implemented across all branches of service. We need you to lead a new joint task force focused on developing the next generation of cyber defense protocols. Your country needs you, Commander." As the ceremony concluded and I stepped down from the stage, I was surrounded by admirals and generals offering congratulations and, more significantly, discussions of future collaborations. My career path had just been dramatically altered, opening doors I hadn't known existed. In the midst of this professional whirlwind, I spotted Lieutenant Bradley approaching with a slight smile. "Permission to speak freely again, Commander?" "Always, Lieutenant. I took the liberty of calling your mother this morning. Told her to turn on the Defense Department's live stream at 1000 hours. I stared at her, processing the implications. "You didn't." "I did," she confirmed. "Your father's medal shelf just got a lot more inadequate, ma'am." For the first time in days, I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh that felt like release. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." As the crowd began to disperse, Admiral Wilson approached with a final comment. "Commander, we'll need you back here tomorrow at 0800 to begin briefing on the Joint Task Force. I suggest you get some rest. The real work is just beginning." I left the Pentagon that afternoon with a Distinguished Service Medal on my uniform and a new sense of purpose that had nothing to do with proving my worth to anyone but myself. I returned to my hotel room in a state of disbelief, carefully placing the Distinguished Service Medal beside the Legion of Merit in my travel case. 2 major decorations in the span of a month, a career achievement by any standard. The enormity of the day's events was still sinking in when my phone rang. "Commander Carter," I answered. "Samantha." My mother's voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, Samantha. We saw everything on the live stream. Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't know myself, Mom. It was a complete surprise." It was incredible. The Secretary of Defense herself. And everything they said about what you did, we had no idea it was so significant. I heard movement in the background. Then my mother's muffled voice, "No, William, let me finish talking to her first." "Is Dad there?" I asked, my stomach tightening reflexively. "He is," she replied cautiously. He wants to talk to you, but I told him I needed a moment first." She paused. "Samantha, I'm in Washington. I got on the first flight after Lieutenant Bradley called. I'm at Reagan National now." The news caught me completely off guard. "You're here? In D.C.? "Yes." I couldn't. After seeing the ceremony, I couldn't just stay home. "Can I come see you?" 20 minutes later, a knock at my hotel room door announced my mother's arrival. When I opened it, she stood there in the same floral dress she had worn to countless school events and military ceremonies throughout my childhood, her eyes red-rimmed but smiling. "My girl," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "My extraordinary girl." We ordered room service and sat talking for hours, not just about the ceremony or my career, but about everything, her abandoned nursing career, the challenges of being a military spouse, the regrets she carried about not standing up to my father more often. "I should have done more," she said, picking at her salad. "When he dismissed your accomplishments or pushed you toward a more appropriate path for a woman. I knew it was wrong, but challenging William has never been easy. You supported me in your own way, Mom. I always knew you were proud of me." "Not loudly enough," she countered. "I watched that ceremony today, heard what you really did, saving all those lives, changing how the military handles these threats, and I realized how much I've missed by letting your father's perspective dominate our family." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Samantha. And I'm so incredibly proud of the woman and the officer you've become. Not despite going your own way, but because of it." Her words healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still so raw. My mother's quiet support had always been a constant, but her explicit acknowledgement of my path meant more than I could express. As the evening wore on, Mom finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Your father watched the whole ceremony too." "He didn't say much during it, but afterward." She hesitated. "I've never seen him like that. He kept replaying parts of it on his laptop, especially when they explained the strategic importance of what you did." "And?" I prompted, not sure what I wanted to hear. "He's confused, Samantha. His entire understanding of military service is built around physical courage in combat. The idea that his daughter outranks him now, has received honors higher than he ever did, for a type of warfare he doesn't comprehend, it's shaken him." I nodded, understanding better than she knew. My father's identity was so thoroughly entwined with his specific concept of military service that acknowledging the validity of my different path would require him to reconsider fundamental aspects of his worldview. "He wants to see you," Mom continued. "He's still in Virginia, but he asked if you would come home again before returning to your duty station." The request surprised me. Colonel William Carter rarely asked for anything, especially not a second chance at a conversation. "I'll be here for several days for briefings and planning sessions," I explained. "But I could drive down this weekend." Mom nodded, relief evident in her expression. That would mean a lot to him. To both of us. After she left to check into her own hotel room, I stood at the window overlooking the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. The city below represented the heart of the government I had sworn to protect. The strategic center I had helped secure through my unconventional battlefield. My phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Bradley. "Congratulations again, Commander. Team's celebrating your promotion at O'Malley's. Join us if you can." I smiled, realizing I had found my true military family in the teams that understood and valued my contributions. Whatever happened with my father this weekend, I now knew my worth wasn't dependent on his recognition. The weekend arrived quickly, filled with intensive briefings about the new joint task force I would be leading. By Saturday afternoon, I was driving south on I-95 toward Alexandria, my dress uniform hanging in the back seat for an event at the Pentagon the following Monday. This time, as I pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt different, not the anxious daughter seeking approval, but a decorated naval officer secure in her achievements. Ryan's truck was notably absent, leaving just my parents' sedan in the driveway. Dad opened the door before I could knock, standing straighter than usual in a pressed shirt and slacks, as if preparing for an inspection. "Samantha," he said, his voice gruff but uncertain. "Come in." The house felt different too, or perhaps I was the one who had changed. The wall of honor caught my eye immediately as we entered the living room. Something was different. It took me a moment to realize what my Legion of Merit was no longer positioned with Ryan's decorations. Instead, a new section of the wall had been cleared, with both my Naval Academy diploma and the Legion of Merit displayed prominently. "Your mother rearranged things," Dad explained, following my gaze. "Said it was long overdue." Mom emerged from the kitchen, giving me a quick hug before announcing, "I'll let you two talk. I'll be upstairs if you need me." Her strategic retreat left Dad and me alone in the living room, the weight of decades of misunderstanding hanging between us. "I saw the ceremony," he finally said, gesturing for me to sit. "The Distinguished Service Medal. That's significant." "Yes, it is," I agreed, taking a seat but maintaining my posture. "I didn't understand," he continued after a moment. "What you do, the importance of it. In my day, warfare was physical. You could see the enemy, measure ground taken or lost." He ran a hand through his silver hair, a rare gesture of discomfort from the usually composed colonel. "When you talked about cybersecurity and digital threats, it sounded like glorified IT work to me, not real soldiering." He shook his head. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between us. Colonel William Carter rarely admitted error about anything, let alone something so fundamental to his worldview. "The Secretary of Defense called what you prevented the potential equivalent of Pearl Harbor. Said you changed how the military approaches these threats." He looked at me directly. "I didn't give you the respect you deserved, and I'm sorry for that." The apology was unexpected and imperfect, delivered with the same military directness he applied to everything, but it was sincere. "Thank you, Dad," I said simply. "Your brother called yesterday," he continued. "After seeing the ceremony online, he was quite direct with me about how I've treated you." That surprised me. Ryan had always been supportive but rarely confrontational with our father. He said I'd been blind to how warfare has evolved, that commanders like you are fighting battles just as critical as anything he does in the field, maybe more so. Dad's expression softened slightly. He also said the Silver Star nomination was rejected, but he didn't mind because, and I quote, "Sam's out there earning enough medals for both of us." I couldn't help but smile at that. It sounded exactly like something Ryan would say. Dad stood and walked to a drawer in the side table. When he turned back, he was holding my Legion of Merit in its presentation case. "This belongs to you, not on my wall." Ryan brought it back before he deployed again. "Said I had no right to claim your achievements as part of my legacy." He held the case out to me. He was right. I took the medal, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Thank you. I may never fully understand the details of what you do, Samantha," he admitted. "But I understand its importance now. And I'm proud of the officer you've become, even if it's not the path I would have chosen for you." It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of rigid thinking couldn't change overnight, but it was an honest acknowledgement of my value as a military officer in my own right. For now, that was enough. The remainder of the weekend passed with less tension than any family gathering in memory. Dad asked genuine questions about my work, limited to what I could share without violating security protocols. Mom beamed throughout, occasionally squeezing my hand under the table like she had so many times before, but now without the need to compensate for Dad's dismissal. By Sunday evening, as I prepared to return to Washington for Monday's meetings, something had shifted permanently in our family dynamic. The change was evident as Dad walked me to my car. "The joint task force they're having you lead," he said. "That's a significant command. Usually goes to someone with captain's bars." "The promotion board meets next month," I replied. Admiral Wilson hinted it might be expedited. Dad nodded. "Captain Samantha Carter. Has a good ring to it." He hesitated, then added, "When it happens, I'd like to be there. If that's permitted." "I'd like that too, Dad." We didn't hug. Some transitions take more time, but the handshake he offered carried more respect than any previous farewell. As I drove back to Washington that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The medal in my bag represented not just my professional achievement, but a personal victory, the beginning of a new understanding with my father, and, more importantly, a new understanding of myself. 2 months later, I stood in my new office at the Pentagon, unpacking the few personal items I had brought to personalize the space. The Distinguished Service Medal and Legion of Merit, now joined by the captain's bars on my uniform, were displayed not on a wall but on my desk, visible reminders not of family legacy, but of challenges overcome and lives protected. A knock at the door interrupted my arrangement efforts. Lieutenant Bradley, now Lieutenant Commander Bradley, following her own well-deserved promotion, stood at attention in the doorway. "Captain Carter, the Joint Service Team is assembled in the conference room. We're ready when you are." "Thank you, Commander," I replied, straightening my uniform. "Let's get to work." As I followed her down the corridor toward my new command, I realized that the medal my father had once dismissed had led me to exactly where I was meant to be. Not as Colonel Carter's daughter, but as Captain Samantha Carter, cyber warfare specialist, task force commander, and officer charting her own course in a changing military landscape. The validation I had sought for so long had always been there in the lives saved, the missions accomplished, and the respect of those who understood the importance of the battles fought in the digital domain. My father's recognition, while healing, was simply the final piece falling into place in a life defined by service on my own terms. Have you ever had to forge your own path despite family expectations? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. How did you find validation when those closest to you didn't understand your choices? Please share your stories. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life journeys, and remember that true worth comes from within, not from others' approval. Thank you for joining me today. And may you find the courage to stand firm in your own accomplishments, whatever form they take.